China has actually confessed to some interesting claims that a lot of people probably assumed. We can probably guess that they were happening, as you said. But usually you don't get an admission. This, again, comes from the Wall Street Journal and some of their sources.
So if you'll remember last year during the Biden administration, there was concerns about this cyber attack on the U.S. infrastructure, and that they were finding this malware that was embedded within key infrastructure centers within the United States, whether it be power, energy, things of that nature. And it was accredited to that it came from China. You know, the United States believed that the People's Republic of China and the party probably had something to do with it, but obviously they would never have admitted that publicly. But it was a big shock at the time to see some of the vulnerabilities that we had here at home that could be susceptible to some of these types of cyber attacks. Well, it turns out that the outgoing Biden administration had a secret meeting with Chinese officials at the end of last year in December. And in that meeting, the Chinese officials actually acknowledged in this summit in Geneva that the Chinese were behind it, that the government itself, not trying to just blow it off, talk about some rogue actors or some criminal elements within the country, but they actually were behind it. This is unprecedented. Normally, your adversary in this doesn't admit to this, doesn't fess up.
They may be doing it, but they're not usually talking about it.
And it was so much so that the United States had it as an agenda item to talk about. It was called Volt Typhoon, but decided to not bring it up, thinking that there's no way that they were going to even have any sort of discussion about this, because they would just deny and move on. They instead were talking about some phone hacking that also occurred that was directed by the government of China that swept up AT&T and some of the other carriers and actually involved some eavesdropping on some of the presidential campaign periphery people. But it was one of the delegation members of China that brought it up himself. And it was seen there that by many, that he was making this admission almost as if to say, if you come towards Taiwan, if you push us, look what we can do. And that, when you have that context, obviously the Biden team, they said briefed the incoming president post-election, pre-transition to President Trump.
Yeah, so just that December time.
The Biden team gets this information, relays it to the incoming President Trump team. And when you have this context of a weak president finds this out, and then the incoming strong president has this knowledge, a lot of the escalation that's going on with China right now in the tariff war game starts to make a lot more sense.
This is something that happened, I mean, only a few months ago. We're talking about back in December. This happened, but it happened. You got to remember, a lot can be disrupted in that election period to inauguration period when there is an outgoing administration that is not thrilled.
And we know how the world reacted to the Biden presidency. They took steps to strengthen their posture against the United States during 4 years of a weak foreign policy led by, in name, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, but Jake Sullivan, Wendy Sherman, the Victoria Nulands of the world, all of these people, Secretary Blinken, that were leading the foreign policy of the United States and took us steps back, maybe even decades back, in the posture of the United States on the world stage, causing all of this catch-up that you're having to see in this first 80 days of the Trump presidency. And so when you look at the fact that the tariff, there's a pause for the entire world except against China.
Yeah. And that happened since we've been, I think, on air. That happened where the pauses went through. I guess that happened a couple days ago.
Right.
The pauses went through, so a lot of people who are concerned about the tariffs, but China's sort of the big one.
But they keep going back and forth. There's up to 125% tariffs across the board on China at this point. And when you see that and you see the strength that's now having to be put forward against China, it also tells you how far the ability to negotiate and duel it out with the Chinese officials have gotten, because they were brazen enough in a meeting to admit they were behind pre-positioning software to be able to strike at the very heart of America being able to operate. That would be on civilian infrastructure. That's not just hitting a military target if they felt they needed to do an attack on the United States. That is costing many casualties and issues with the civilian population in the United States. That's telling you how serious it got and why I think in some degree, I think maybe even the administration should be able to vocalize this to some degree of how bad the relationship has gotten, how brazen China feels, that you have to be tough now with things like a trade war, or else it becomes a hot war with actual military conflict. And I don't think anyone in the world wants to see an actual military war with China.
I definitely don't want that. I mean, you had even people like Kevin, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank saying, hey, you know what? Make it a 400% tariff. Then we'll actually get to the table and get stuff done.
To think somehow that anyone doubted for a moment that the Chinese Communist Party wasn't hard at trying to take down the United States of America in really fundamental ways. And so now we have evidence that in December, the Chinese told them that, yeah, we did this. We were partly responsible for this. But we've known for many, many years that the Chinese were preparing to go after infrastructure. Think telecommunications, think financial services, think our energy pipelines, even think of things like dams and waterways. The Chinese Communist Party has been hard at this, and we have a lot of work to do to defend ourselves and to continue to deter them from actually executing against these in ways that can really hurt ordinary Americans all across the country and our economy.
They are not to be taken lightly, that this is the goal of the Chinese Communist Party. You've talked about spy dens in different consulates that while you were Secretary of State had to put an end to. But I think what shook me about this story to some degree is that typically there's the diplomatic niceties and of course they would never admit to, but that we got to a point where the Chinese Communist Party is so comfortable because of how weak they perceive the United States or how much they feel like they've gotten the upper hand over the past years that they would admit to something like this instead of the hiding behind the typical diplomatic, oh, that was some rogue actor, we would have nothing to do with this, obviously. That, I think, is what surprised me the most out of this story.
Yes, I think that's true. Incredibly brazen. And by the way, fitting, right? They run a spy balloon across the country. The United States under Joe Biden did literally nothing to impose cost on the Chinese Communist Party. And we've seen that reverse already, and we're still in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. But I agree. The fact that they would just, it looks like sound from the reporting, casually say, yeah, no, we were part of that, is unique and different. And I think tells us how determined they are and, frankly, how little they respected the United States under President Biden.